Allison. I'm a reading specialist and the author of the blog Learning at the Primary Pond. And I am coming to you live so we can chat about supporting those students in your class that are not yet reading at grade level. Maybe they're a little behind in their early literacy skills if you teach kindergarten, or they're not quite reading where they should be if you teach first and second grade. That's what we're going to be talking about in this video. I do want to let you know though, this video is going to be relatively short compared to the full-length webinars that I have planned. Those are coming up super soon, January 12th. I've got 2 kinder first and second. Monday, I've got, I think it's first and second, and then Tuesday is another kindergarten webinar. We are going to go so much more in depth on how to help those struggling readers when you feel like you've tried everything and they're just not moving. We're going to talk about how to know if there might be an issue with a child, like what causes these things. I'll show you activities that you can do. So those webinars are going to be way more in depth. So if this is helpful to you, then I really hope you'll join me for those. And I believe I included both of those links in the post. So you can sign up for either the kindergarten or the first and second grade webinar, or both. There are some teachers that are coming to both because they have kids working at a variety of levels, and you are welcome to do that too. All right, but today what I really want to focus on is how to find time to support your struggling readers. I know if you're watching this, you're a dedicated teacher, you want all of your students to succeed, right? Not just some of them, you want all of them. And some students just need a little extra help. But the hard part, especially if you're a classroom teacher, is that there are limits on your time, right? Anybody feel the time constraints every single day at school? Anybody ever feel like, you know, oh, well, I know exactly what this kid could benefit from, but I don't have time to help them? It's just me. There's no other teacher, no other help. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that way. Ever, you know, been driving home just thinking about that one student who, or maybe multiple students who, you know, they're just not moving ahead. Maybe you're not sure why, or maybe you do know why, but you wish you had more time with them. These are the kids that tend to weigh on my heart. Would also love to know, and you don't have to name names, obviously, but how many kids come to mind when I'm talking about this? Do you have 1 student that comes to mind? Do you have 3? Do you have 5? Do you have 10? I'm just curious what your balance is in your classroom, because some years it's, you know, a normal balance, like 1 to 20% of your kids may need some intervention. That's considered normal, but some years it's not. Some years your class is skewed. So I would really love to hear from you. And again, I don't need names, obviously. That would not be appropriate, but I'm just curious how many kids come to mind when we're talking about maybe kindergartners who are struggling with phonological awareness, phonics. Maybe they're not quite learning their letters. The letters just aren't sticking. Or if you teach first and second, maybe you've got some kids that their fluency isn't where it should be. They're not reading quickly and smoothly enough. Maybe they have phonics gaps. Maybe they're decoding just fine, but their comprehension is off. I just curious to know how many students are coming to mind as we're talking about this. All right, so we know we have an issue, right? We want all of our students to succeed, but time is a problem. Now, depending on what your numbers are in your classroom, if you find that more than 20% are struggling with something, a good route to take would be to try to address whatever the skill is in whole group. You're probably doing that, but maybe it's time to double up on some fluency activities that everybody's doing, or some phonics activities for everybody. Another way to work it in is in your small group, right? If you have, for example, a class of 20 and there's 10 students that really need to work on something, it's not really possible if it's just you to give a true intervention to all of those students, you know, in a one-on-one or one-on-two setting. So there's other ways to address these gaps that maybe your class just came in and a lot of them were low in one area. So that would be a time when you want to kind of address it whole group. Now, there are kids though, and again, I would love to know how many you're thinking of in your class. There are kids that are just going to need more. That's just the way, you know, things shake out. Some kids just need a little bit more support. It's probably not anything that you are doing wrong. It's just that they need more time. Struggling readers often are just as capable as other readers of getting to, you know, grade level, but it takes them more time. They need more practice than other kids do. Now, I'm a reading specialist currently, but when I was in the classroom, this time thing really tripped me up because I've always been interested in serving my struggling readers, but again, there's only one of me. How do I do that? So one thing that has really helped me is to do it first thing in the morning. I find that if at one point I was waiting till the very end of the day, and of course you can imagine how that went. If I waited till the very end of the day, of course that was like, things just got pushed back, schedules got off, and that was the first thing to go. But what I found was that if we take care of it first thing in the morning, so maybe there's like 1 or 2 children who they come in, I let them get settled. If there's some kind of like play or exploration activity on the tables, I let them do that for a little bit. But then while the kids are maybe doing morning work or just getting, turning in papers and doing all that other stuff, I will pull a couple of those kids and I'll work with them. And again, in the full length webinars, which the links are up there in the post for you, I'll go into much more detail on what I actually do with those students. But first thing in the morning, I'll pull them with me, we'll work on things, and that way I know like, hey, like no matter what happens today, no matter how crazy our schedule gets, those kids are going to get taken care of. Another option, and you may already have this in your school, or maybe you can create it in your schedule, is to have a consistent intervention block. How many years? It was probably like 5, 6 years ago. I was teaching in a school where we had like, I think they called it acceleration, where I think it was maybe half an hour reading. We actually had other teachers, like it was, it happened to be a reading specialist. It could be any other teacher in the building, and we would split up our kids. So like I would have the lowest group, for example, another teacher would have a middle group, and then a third teacher would have, kids that needed to be challenged. And that does require extra teachers, but that part of the day was blocked off, and at 2 o'clock or whenever it was, the other teachers would come in and we'd give those kids exactly what they needed. Now, I was still doing guided reading in small groups, so it was really kind of like a double dose, but that block was set aside for us every single day. Now, I realize that you may not have other teachers coming in to help you, and that is a challenge, right? When we're thinking about struggling readers, they're supposed to receive stuff that's different from what the other kids are getting, and also above and beyond. So we can't be pulling them like during our normal reading block, because they're supposed to be getting the instruction that all the other kids are getting. We don't want them to miss math, right? We don't want them to miss science or social studies either, even though sometimes that's what happens, because building that content knowledge is so important for comprehension. So we don't want to, disable them in that way either, or, take away from their learning in that way rather. So it's hard to figure out when to do it. But if you can swing it, maybe it's just 20 minutes where every day, the other kids are working on something else, or maybe you switch which groups you see, just a double dose when the kids aren't missing one of their core subjects, and you can provide support to those students. Again, I know it's hard because it's like, when do you have this time? If you have an intervention block at your school, or you've implemented that in your classroom, I would love to hear from you and just know kind of how that works, because I think it's always helpful for us to see like, oh, this is how this school does it, and this is how this school does it. So maybe you can implement a version of it for yourself, even if it doesn't quite work. Like in my school, we had other teachers pushing in, you can probably still make it work in some way. Another option, and this almost kind of goes with a consistent intervention block, if it's just you, maybe you see 1 less guided reading group per day. So you have your normal guided reading schedule, you're still like seeing your low kids frequently, but then you also have an intervention block, maybe 4 days a week, that fills in that last guided reading group, depending on how many guided reading groups you can see. I would only recommend this if you're already, if you already have time for like 3 guided reading groups a day, maybe one of them goes some days, just a little way to sneak in more support for those lower readers. And the advantage of doing it that way is that the other kids are already occupied in their like literacy activities, right? So it's not like you necessarily have to find something else for the other kids to do, because they're just in centers, or they're doing daily 5. It doesn't feel like a whole other time of the day to plan for, even though you're doing something different and specific with your lower students, or students who need more support. So that is one option too, that might feel a little bit lighter than trying to come up with some extra intervention block. Or even if your schedule is tight in the morning, that could be an option too. Now, when we're talking about intervention, we as the teachers want to be the ones doing it. There's been a lot of research that shows that it does matter, like a skilled, trained person who knows about reading instruction, when they're the one giving the instruction, then the intervention is typically more successful. So obviously that creates a challenge because, again, there's usually, unless you're co-teaching, which is amazing, there's usually only one certified teacher in the room, and that might be you. So, you know, how do you clone yourself, right? Well, we can use these strategies, but I also highly recommend using the help of as many adults as possible. And maybe that's not like the formal intervention, right? But it's extra help. I highly, highly recommend, if you have access to an aide, instead of having them like cut stuff out, you know, have them working instructionally with the student. If you teach kindergarten, in that full-length webinar, I'm going to show you such a simple like alphabet routine that you can have an aide or an instructional aide do with a student just to practice, and it still benefits them. You don't have to count it as a formal intervention because it may not count. You know, the teacher or the reading specialist may need to be the one that's doing it, but you can still give that child extra practice, which supports everything else that you're doing. Volunteers, I talk about this all the time, but I have been so thankful for the volunteers that have helped me out and my students out. Volunteers can do something like, for example, with first and second grade students, I will show you in that webinar like a fluency thing that they can do. This is a fluency routine that has been proven to really help struggling readers. And it's honestly pretty simple. It's just a matter of like listening to the student read, maybe reading with the student, tracking how they do. This is something that a volunteer can do. And maybe you have parents in your classroom that are willing and able to volunteer. Maybe you don't. Maybe a lot of the families in your classroom, it's like a single parent household or both parents are working. So where do you go, right? Churches will often have volunteer programs. You or your principal may be able to just reach out and say, hey, like we could really use some support during this time of day, and then they could ask members if they would be willing to come in and help. Local businesses sometimes will partner with a school as well. Maybe, you know, some of your students have reading buddies, and if there's already a program in place, but you feel like you could need more help, why not just ask your principal to see if you could build on that existing relationship and see if you can pull in more help to your classroom. Again, in those full-length webinars, I will show you routines that an aide or a volunteer can do. And of course, it's you or the reading specialist or even a special education teacher for those formal interventions, but any help that you can get for those students will make a difference for them. Another option too is sometimes you have older students who are really nurturing and gifted with teaching, and maybe they're really advanced and their teacher is willing to let them like come to your classroom and work with the child. Again, the stuff we're going to talk about in the webinars, you can even give to an older student. Sometimes it's just a matter of having like a higher level peer. Obviously, a kindergartner is not going to do reading intervention with another student, but if there's any opportunities that you can use to make independent work more profitable, more efficient, more helpful for your struggling students, because we all know that sometimes we have activities and then the struggling students go off and they can't really do them, right? If you can pair them up with a peer, if they can listen to a peer read and follow along, that's one small thing. To me, it's all about building in opportunities throughout the day, because even if I do have the most fabulous intervention block, it may not be enough, because again, coming back to what I was saying earlier, struggling readers just need more practice, they need more time, and so anything you can do to make like independent work more effective, you know, independent reading, maybe they read with the help of somebody else, anything you can do to build those opportunities in throughout the day is going to go a long way in helping them move forward. Okay, so I would love to hear from you. I would love to know maybe how you are hoping to help your readers. Maybe if you have been thinking of a child and maybe they're stuck and you're not sure how to push them ahead, I would love to hear from you. But I do want to encourage you to sign up for those webinars. I typically am on kind of like a 2-year rotation where I won't do these webinars, the full-length ones, live again for about 2 years. So take a look at the dates. There's 2-date options for kinder and 2-date options for first and second grade. If you can't make them live for some reason, I would love to have you make them live, A, because I feel like it just makes a difference in, you know, like committing to it and doing it, but B, to ask questions, C, because I'm actually going to be giving away some memberships to my kindergarten literacy club and first and second grade literacy club, yay. So you have to be there live to take part in that, and also just to chat and have the whole experience of sharing with other teachers and hearing from other teachers. So I'd love to have you join me live, but if you can't, I still want to encourage you to sign up. You will get a recording afterward, and that will work for about a week. So again, in those webinars, we're going to cover, you know, why some students get stuck, like why are they struggling with reading even though you're working so hard to help them. We're going to talk about simple things that you can do, make changes in their routine, activities that will help them, how to pinpoint exactly what to focus on, especially if you teach first and second grade. You may find that, like, okay, well, like some kids, like, oh, it's like obviously a decoding issue, or with some kids, it's obviously a comprehension issue. But sometimes you see, like, well, they're struggling with decoding and fluency too, and a little bit of comprehension. And then you're wondering, well, like, what do I focus on, right? You have limited amount of time to do interventions. What should you be focusing on? Of course, they need to learn all, but what do you hone in on first? So I'm going to share with you in those webinars my entire process for going, okay, so these are the little assessments I would give. These are the assessments I look at, because you don't necessarily have to like give any extra assessments. You can use my process with what you already have, but it's all about going through the assessments, saying, okay, let's look at this first, let's look at this next, and then let's look at this last, to really try and pinpoint. Because again, your time is limited. All our time is limited. We want to really hone in on what those kids need and do just that. All right, well, if you have any questions, ask me anything about reading intervention, but we will be going way more in depth on the webinars. I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope you got a couple of ideas about how to sneak in just some more minutes and make the time that you do have really helpful and valuable for those kiddos. I know we're all pressed for time, but I hope that one of these things will be workable for you. So let me know in the comments if you're going to try one of these things, and have a wonderful rest of your day.